Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Vav. Today's daf is sponsored for the refuah shlema of Yona bar Brachat Yona bar Brachat Tzivya. Okay, we're going to get started. Today, before we start, I'll just remind everyone a few words about just options about learning that we have on Hadran, specifically for Masechet Chullin. First of all, there's a bookmark. You can find the PDF of it on every page. If you don't have bookmarks yet for the whole Seder Cutim, which we sent out from when we started back in Zvachim, you can write to us by email, info@hadran.org.il, and we can send you bookmarks. Just be patient because the mail is really slow. Secondly, there's an introduction to Chullin by Ayelet Lipson if you haven't listened, and going up later today is Alana Steinhain in Din and Daf, also gave kind of an overview, not the same kind of introduction as Ayelet, but an overview of some things that are relevant in Introduction to Chullin. And Shuli Mishkin's article, Flashback, went up yesterday about, we had the Orviyim in the name of a place and how people's names based on locations, some history of the time period. And in general, there's weekly content that goes up, so you can always follow on Beyond the Daf. There's a podcast channel called Beyond the Daf, where you can just automatically come to your podcast if you want, or you can follow it on our site. Section Beyond the Daf, on every Daf page, you can find at the bottom related content. And also, by the way, we sent out, and also we send the links in the WhatsApp groups. If you're part of the WhatsApp groups where we send the links out, which you can get to from the subscribe page. So also we resent, what's nice about having all these shiurim that are generated weekly is often there's parallels where a sugya came up somewhere else. So Rabbi Yaakov Clymer gave a shiur a while back in Zvachim about korbanot and the blood, and that related to sugya that we were learning. So that also we resent the link out, so you can follow that if you would like. Okay, we're going to now get started. Enough announcements. Today, our topic, we're going to have a lot of tangents. Okay, and I'll explain to you how we get off on these different tangents. If you recall, we ended yesterday's daf in the middle, kind of. We had this situation where Yochanan said the name of Rabbi Yaakov in the name of blah, 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 without getting into all the names. But the main character here we're going to talk about is Rabbi Yaakov, who basically passes down that Rabban Gamliel and his court decided to forbid shechita of the Cutim. We're going to learn a little history about the Cutim today. So, by the way, there's articles also written in the past about Cutim. If you're interested in reading up about it on our site, you can just search. Okay, the search tool is very useful. You can search Cutim, and I believe Shuli Mishkin wrote an article about it at least once, if not more. So you could probably find her article about it, and there's probably other shiurim, right? Besides, like it'll show you dapim, but if you look at Beyond the Daf and search there, you'll find other extra content on the daf that more in depth that relates to the Cutim. Today is going to be really a bit of a history about the Cutim. Again, you can't really learn exact history because we don't know exactly how to read all these sources, but we will make some suggestions. So comes Rabban Gamliel in his court, and they decide to forbid the shechita of a Cuti. So comes Rabbi Zeira, and he says to Rabbi Yaakov, who said this, is it possible that it's only not when a Jew is watching? To which he said, of course that can't be, because that was already forbidden before. So you only were able to have a Cuti if the Jew was watching. So obviously when he forbade it, he must have forbidden it even if a Jew was watching. Okay? And basically saying, you're wrong. So the question was does Rabbi Zeira agree in the end with what Rabbi Yaakov is, that the Gezerah of Rabban Gamliel covered all cases, that no shechita of a Cuti is permitted, even if a Jew was watching and saw that everything was done properly, we still don't permit it. So how do we know that, in fact, he did change his mind? Because, and he did agree with Rabbi Yaakov, because there's this situation where Rav Nachman said that Rav Asi said that I saw Rabbi Yochanan eating the shechita of a Cuti. Then came Rabbi Asi himself and ate the shechita of a Cuti, right? Ate meat that was slaughtered by a Cuti. And then Rabbi Zeira said, did they not know about the Gzeira and make a mistake? Or, right, and had they known, they never would have eaten it. Or did they know and disagree with the Gzeira? Okay, today we'll see why there's possible reason to disagree with the Gzeira. But right now we don't know why, but that's what he's suggesting. In the end, he says it must be they disagree with the Gzeira, and that's why they ate it. Because there's no way God would have brought a mistake, a terrible mistake to happen, that these great rabbis would eat something that was deemed not kosher, basically. Okay, and his proof is because if the animals of tzaddikim don't do this, then then for sure not the tzaddikim themselves. And we mentioned the story of the donkey of Pinchas ben Yair that wouldn't eat food, and they didn't know why he wasn't eating the food, and then they realized at the end that the food wasn't meiser. And that's why the donkey wouldn't eat it, because it was untithed produce. By the way, I looked it up. There's a bunch of stories about this where Rabbi Zeira uses a story with animals as proof, and Rabbi Zeira seems to be the main person quoting this, who has this line. One story brought is similar but different. It's about the donkey of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa, who gets kidnapped. And then the kidnappers try to feed the donkey, and the donkey won't eat anything. And then in the end, they basically send the donkey home because the donkey's creating problems, because the donkey's starved, and then it's because the donkey didn't want to eat their food. Okay, that's the second story. And I think it was because it wasn't tithed, or maybe because it wasn't kosher. I don't remember exactly. The other story that's, I think, even more interesting, and it doesn't have to do with food, eating food, it was the camels of Abraham. Okay, forget about the fact this whole question about the Gmalim in the time of Abraham, but putting that issue aside, the camels of Abraham wouldn't go into houses of idol worship. Okay, there's all sorts of midrashim that appear in the midrashic literature. So anyway, that was just an interesting aside. If the Gemara can go on asides, then I guess I can too. Okay, so now back to our story. So how do they prove from this story that Rabbi Zeira in the end says it must be, right, that they didn't make a mistake, and therefore they must have known. Now, Isal Kadataf, starting at the top of our daf, lo kid lamine, if we say that Rabbi Zeira didn't accept what Rabbi Yaakov said, lishanele, then he should have just simply said, kan she Yisrael omer al gabav, v'kan kashein Yisrael omer al gabav. He would have had a much easier answer. He would have said, oh, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi, what did they do? They ate the shechita of a Cuti because a Jew was watching. And Rabban Gamliel forbade it only when a non-Jew wasn't watching. That would have been a much easier way to say it. And instead he has to say the only possible thing is that they must have disagreed with him completely. So elalav shmamina, kibla mine shmamina. So therefore it's pretty clear he accepted what Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi said. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, we're still on topic, okay, before we get off topic, umay time agazru buhu rabbanan. Why did the rabbis decree that you can't accept the shechita of a Cuti? If it was accepted before when a Jew was watching, then why can't it be accepted now? So ki had Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar shadru Rabbi Meir la tuyecham Rabbi Bei Kutai. We're going to have a story. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, 5th generation Tana. Okay, it's important why I'm telling you this. We'll see later. Rabbi Meir sends him to bring wine from Bei Kutai, from the house of a Cuti. Eshkachehu Saba. Now, while he's on the way to do this, an elderly man comes up to him and says, Amarle, he quotes him a pasuk from Mishlei, V'samta sakim below echa im bal nefesh ata. Okay, which means put a knife in your mouth, in your cheek, which really means shut your mouth, okay, or stop what you're doing. Okay, literally means shut your mouth. But what it means here is stop what you're doing. Don't continue what you're doing if you're a bal nefesh. Okay, if you're a person who really cares, you're not going to do this. You're not going to take wine from the Cutim. So what does Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, right? Rabbi Meir sent him to do this errand. Halach Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar v'siper dvarim lifnei Rabbi Meir. He goes back to Rabbi Meir and he tells him what this elderly person told him. V'gazar alehem. And then Rabbi Meir said, don't drink their wine. My taima, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So I guess Rabbi Meir looked into it. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak tells us what was the reason. Because Demut Yonah Matzulan Berosh Har Grizim Shayu Avdim Ota. Okay, to this day, the Shomonim, right, which are the Cutim, are living in Har Grizim, and they found this image of a Yonah, a dove, or a pigeon, that was that they were worshiping. Okay, and he realized now it wasn't that all the Cutim were worshiping this idol; it was that some of them were. Rabbi Meir l'ta'amei dechayesh l'miuta. And now you're going to see why this Gzeira was not necessarily everyone held by it. Because, we talked about why did Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Asi not agree? Because Rabbi Meir is of this unique opinion that comes up in many other sugyot that we've seen, that he's concerned for minorities. Even though, right, generally we follow the majority, he often was stringent based on the fact that there's a minority of people that are doing this. So he says, look, you can't just go and take their animals that they're slaughtering if maybe the person you're buying it from, or drink their wine, if maybe the person you're getting the wine from is possibly an idol worshiper, okay? And therefore, he's concerned for the minority, So he made a decree that even the majority of them that aren't worshiping, but can't eat from them, can't drink their wine because maybe you're getting it from one of the idol worshippers. And then, how does this relate to the shechita? Well, Rabban Gamliel beitino nami ki Rabbi Meir svira lahu. Okay, Rabban Gamliel in his court must have held like Rabbi Meir. Now, we talked yesterday that it's not clear which Rabban Gamliel. There's one that lived before Rabbi Meir, there's one that lived after Rabbi Meir. If it's the one that lived before, then it's a little strange. It's like saying the father looks like the son, right? Usually say the son, or right, the daughter looks like the mother. So you don't say the mother looks like the daughter, okay? So it would be a little strange. This a little bit more supports the reading that Rabban Gamliel held like Rabbi Meir. It was the Rabban Gamliel that came after Rabbi Meir. Okay, but without getting too much into detail, the point is they're both of the same thinking, which is they both think that you have to be concerned for minority, and therefore didn't allow their shechitas either. Okay, in other words, Rabbi Meir was talking about the wine, Rabban Gamliel extended it to the shechita, okay, to the slaughtering. Now, before we go on, we're now going to go back for a minute to something we mentioned and just explain Pashti Dekraba Mai Ktiv. What's this pasuk talking about that we quoted from Mishlei? Okay, and they're going to, in a minute, quote the entire pasuk. And they're going to say, or actually two pasukim. We quoted one pasuk. Okay, put a knife in your cheek if you want to be a careful person. But we're now going to read the whole pasuk, okay, the one that comes before it. And now the Gemara is going to explain what the simple reading of it. I wouldn't exactly say simple reading, because it's not the simple reading. It's what's it really coming to teach you. It's giving you an image that's supposed to really teach you about Talmida Yoshev Lifnei Rabo, about a student who sits before the teacher. You'll see this is really not the simple reading, even though it's funny. They say, what's the simple reading of that pasuk? Maybe they mean like, what's Mishlei trying to tell you here? So there's deeper meaning. Ditani Rabbi Chia, and now Rabbi Chia brought a braita, and here he quotes the pasuk. Ki teshev lilchom et moshel. When you sit down to eat with an important, prominent person, bin tavin et asher lefanecha. Properly understand the situation. Okay, you have to assess the situation. V'santa skim beloecha. Sometimes it's better to be quiet and put a knife in your mouth and not say anything. Im bal nefesh ata. If you are a person who wants to do the right thing. Okay, it's a kind of loose way of translating that. So now, what does this have to do with the Talmid Yoshev Lifnei Rabo? What kind of situation do you have to figure out and assess, and when do you have to be silent, and what is the Im bal nefesh ata? So here comes the analysis of Rabbi Chia, the bright of Rabbi Chia. Im yodea tamid berabo, sheyodea lachzir lo ta'am bin. Okay, the bin tavin, which really means understand, right? Bin is from the same language as tavin. It's the same root. Understand, but here they're going to split bin and tavin et asher lefanecha. So we say it like this. If you're sitting before your teacher and you have a question and you don't understand something and you think your teacher will have the answer, then great. Go ahead, ask your question, and you'll understand it. Then bin. That's the bin. But im lav, if you think they might not know the answer to the question, and then what will happen? You'll embarrass your teacher, because your teacher won't know how to answer you. Tavin et asher lefanecha. Understand what kind of situation you're putting yourself into. And sam tasakim loecha, keep your mouth shut. Don't ask the question, because you're going to humiliate your rabbi in front of everybody. Right? I assume we mean also in public, or maybe even just in private between you and right. It's going to make your teacher feel inadequate. Imbal nefesh ata. Now the imbal nefesh actually starts a new thing, which is, well, if you really want to get the answer and be a good person, well, what should you do? Proshemenu, leave your rabbi, go find someone else who can answer your questions properly. Like you're basically not with the right teacher if your teacher can't handle you asking them questions. Okay, and that's the way they darshan that pasuk. Okay, moving back to our topic, but really not moving. Okay, now we're going to go back to another situation with the Cutim, okay, where we're going to have something very similar to what happened in the time of Rabbi Meir and Rabban Gamliel, but it's going to be in a later time period. So the story we just had with Rabbi Shimon and Elazar and Rabbi Meir, we're going to have a complete parallel story, but we're forward a few generations, okay? We're in the Amoraim in Eretz Israel, in Israel. I think it's second or third generation, okay? It's definitely at least second, maybe third, because it's around the time of Rabbi Yochanan. There's Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, okay? They're leaders in his time, so I'm guessing he's like first to second, so they're probably second generation. I just didn't check exactly. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef, Shadre Rabbi Yavau Latuya Cham Rabbi Bekutai. So Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef sends Rabbi Yavau to get wine for him from a Cuti. Same exact situation. Eshkachea husaba. And again, an elderly person, okay, I assume it's not the same one, because if he was old then he'd probably be not alive anymore. But an older person comes, this seems to be the person who's in the know. Amarle, late kan shomrei Torah. There are no shomrei Torah here. Okay, these Cutim don't observe the Torah. Okay, this is a little different than before. Before he just gave him this pasuk, right, which just said, stop what you're doing. Okay, and if you're a Baal Nefesh. Now it sounds a lot worse. These are not Shomrei Torah, these people. Halach Rabbi Yitzchak v'siper dvarim lefnei Rabbi Yaakov. So same thing happens. He goes back to the rabbi who sent him, and he says, listen, this is what the guy told me. Halach Rabbi Yaakov. Now in this case, there it was Rabbi Meir. So he immediately came into action. But Rabbi Yaakov himself didn't know what to do. So he went v'siper dvarim lefnei Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi. So he goes to the great people of his generation, goes to Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi, tells him what happened. V'lozazu misham, they didn't move from there. Ad sha'asaum goyim gemurim, or ovdei kochavim gemurim, depends what your Gemara says. But the point is, they said these Cutim are not to be treated as Jews at all. Okay? So now the Gemara says, Lemai, what are we talking about? Shechita v'yei nesech mehatam gazru bu Rabbanan. Okay, if we're talking a few generations later, so we already forbade the shechita, and we forbade the yain already in the time of Rabbi Meir and Rabban Gamliel. So what exactly is happening? To which they answer, In hu gazru v'lo kiblu minayu, atu Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi gazru v'kiblu minayu. The earlier people made a gzeirah, but people didn't accept it. Okay, why didn't they accept it? Well, first of all, remember, Rabbi Meir was chayish l'miyuta, and apparently so was Rabban Gamliel. And not everybody agrees with that. So it was only, right, there was this minority. Okay, at this point, Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi made a gzeirah, and everyone accepted it. Now the question, there's a few questions. One, I saw someone asked in the chat, which I wanted to relate to, which is, it's the same Rabbi Asi who appeared in yesterday's daf as eating the shechita of Cutim. So you can see he was eating the shechita of Cutim, and then obviously the story happened after, and then he said, no more. We're not going to do this anymore. But what's interesting is, why was it different? Why was Rabbi Meir, it wasn't accepted, and now it was accepted, and what exactly happened? So Rashi gives one interpretation. He says, in the time of Rabbi Meir, lo ratzu lekabel aleihem lifrosh min hakutim. People couldn't handle it, right? We've talked lots of times about gzeirot that people can't handle. There was a lot of interaction. Okay, the question is, what changed between then and then? So one option is Rashi, who says there was a lot of interaction with the Cutim, and they just couldn't do it, right? It was too hard. Whereas by the time of Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi, already there was a split between them. They weren't so much intermingled anymore. They didn't have so much to do with each other, probably business-wise and otherwise, and therefore it was easier. People could handle it. That's one way of looking at it. Another possibility is to say that, and especially if you focus on the main difference in the story, which is he comes and he says, these are not Shomrei Mitzvot, these people. And that there was a shift among the Cutim. The Cutim at first were we talked about, right? They were careful about mitzvot, the mitzvot, right? Some people even think they were really careful, right? About certain things, the things they were careful about, they were super careful about. And it could be over time, right? We started with a small group of idol worshippers. Perhaps that became popular, that most of them were idol worshippers, or maybe they just weren't keeping halakha properly. So there was a shift, not in, right, either a shift in the relationship between, that's why I said we're going to learn history, but we don't really know what history we're learning because we don't know what's the truth. But there's theories here about either the connection with the Jews and the Cutim changed over time, which meant there was less need to, right, once there was a gzeirah that no one really was able to do, but once they were able to do it, better to institute it across the board. Or the Cutim changed in their connection to halakha, and then that obviously is going to affect how we view them, right, and how we treat them. Okay, so we're almost done with this section. There's one more thing they want to understand, which is my goyim gmurim. Like if it's really just the shechita and the nesach or something, like what do they mean? We're going to treat them like complete gentiles. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak levatil reshut v'litain reshut. Okay, this is a halacha in Eruvin, if you remember. If you want to carry in your courtyard, and your courtyard has a few houses open to it, so everyone in the courtyard, they put food down together, and everybody kind of, sells their rights to one of the people, and then basically gives up their space to one person, so that it's as if it's owned by one individual, and then it's basically like one individual's property, and anyone can carry within it. Like if you go into someone's house on Shabbat, you can carry within their house. It doesn't have to be your own house to carry. If it's an individual just domain, then it's fine. What if it's Shabbat and we realize that one of the people like comes back on Shabbat and they weren't part of this Eruv Chatzerot? So if they're Jewish, we can basically say, the Jew can say, I give you rights to my house, okay, without having to sign a formal declaration or do a kinyan, right, which usually you have to do. You can't do a kinyan on Shabbat, an act of acquiring, like pick up a handkerchief, say I'm giving you rights. But just by saying the words, we're going to see in a minute what they are, okay, they can just say, okay, your reshut is mine. Okay, Rashi, there's two terms here, mivatel reshut, which is nullify your domain, or notain reshut, or give your domain over. Rashi claims they're both the same. Some people differentiate between them, but I'm not going to get into this right now because we're not in Eruvin. But if it's a non-Jew in your courtyard, they can't just do that. You have to rent their space from them, okay? You have to actually pay money or do some real act of acquiring, which obviously you can't do on Shabbat. So what does it mean that they're goyim gemurim? That if they were living in the courtyard, they would not be able to levater reshut or litain reshut like a Jew. And now they're going to give you some sources about this. Kedetanya, Yisrael mumar, like it says in the Braita, Yisrael, who leaves the religion, okay, doesn't believe in Judaism anymore, doesn't practice Judaism. Now, there's going to be different types. There's mishamer Shabbato bashuk. If publicly they keep Shabbat in the public domain, okay, so they're not what we call mechalel Shabbat b'ferhesia, okay, they don't desecrate Shabbat in public, then mivater reshut v'notain reshut. So that kind of mumar we can keep, okay, and as they can do all these things, we treat them as a Jew. But if they go out and desecrate Shabbat in public, then we don't allow them to do this, okay? Because they say, and now we're just differentiating Jew and non-Jew. Yisrael notain reshut u'mevater reshut u'begoy ad sheyiskol. Okay, with a non-Jew, it's until you rent, but a Jew can just do this. Ketzad, how do you do it? Amarlo rishuti knui alach, rishuti mevutel alach. Those are the two different languages. Say, my domain is acquired by you. You just say those words, or my domain is nullified to yours. Kana ve'ein sarich liskot. That is effective, and you don't have to do zikoi, which is a more formal acquisition, which you can't do on Shabbat. Okay, so that was all to teach us. What we did in this section was we saw, first of all, Rabbi Zeira with the story of the Ben Tanchel Tzadikim, right? And that when he saw them doing the shechita, he said it must be that they disagreed with the Gzeira, which is interesting because in the end, they reinstate the Gzeira later, or one of them, Rabbi Asi, in the last story. And then we saw these, and the whole theory of Rabbi Zeira was based on how did he assume that was the case? Because he says there's no way God would have brought some stumbling block in front of thee, right, and allowed the tzaddikim, the righteous people, to sin. Okay, why am I repeating that? Because now we're going to go off on two tangents. The second one we're not even going to finish today and see the connection yet, but two stories where Rabbi Zeira says the same thing about the animal of the righteous person and therefore also the righteous person. Completely different topics. Okay, so we started with that story. We're going to come back to it now because we're going to see another story where he uses that. But while we were there, right, the main thing we were talking about then was about the Cuti, and we saw the difference over time about how, right, first Rabbi Meir and Rabban Gamliel, which again, we don't know if Rabban Gamliel was before or after Rabbi Meir, but similar time period, and Rabbi Meir and Rabban Gamliel, one on shechita, one on wine, and then say, you can't drink their wine, you can't allow their shechita, but it wasn't widely accepted yet. In the time of Rabbi Asi and Rabbi Ami, it becomes widely accepted. They basically, right, when they get further information about what exactly is going on in the Cuti community, they institute it much more broad-reaching and becomes accepted, and that's why today we don't treat Cutim as Jews anymore. Okay, now moving on to the next story. So as I said, this is brought only because of the Ben Tanchel Tzadikim line of Rabbi Zeira. Rabbi Zeira v'Rav Asi, this seems to be Rav Asi, not Rabbi Asi, but I don't know, sometimes those things get confused. It's not really so important for our purposes right now, but Iklu lepundakai diyai. They get to this pundak and in an Yai. Yai is a city in the Galilee. They bring him eggs that have shrunken in wine. Okay, either they've shrunken from something, like they're shrunken egg. That's not important. They happen to be in wine, or maybe they were cooked in wine and shrunken. Either which way, we have this combination of egg with wine. The issue is going to be that the pundaki'it, or the pundaki'i, or the person in the pundak, okay, that made the food, when they give them the food, is an Ama Aretz. Now, Ama Aretz what's the issue? Why are people called an Ama Aretz? The Amaretz is a person who's not careful about Trumot Masro. Now, it's not clear, right? Maybe only a minority of them are. Again, it's this issue. Maybe we're worried because of the minority, but any produce we get from them is called demai. Demai is we have to treat it as if Trumot Masro, or Trumot actually we assume they take, but not Masrot. But Masrot, they don't take. So when we get food from someone who's an Amaretz, we have to take Trumot Masrot. So when this innkeeper gives them food and serves them the food, he says, Rabbi Zeira lo achal. He says, I'm not eating this. It wasn't tithed. V'Rav Asi achal. But Rav Asi ate it. Rabbi Zeira lo Rav Asi. V'lo chayish mar l'tarovet demai. Are you not worried here that the wine? Now, what's the issue? Eggs, you don't need to take tithes from them. But wine comes from grapes. You have to tithe the grapes. So he says, are you not worried about the wine that's mixed in here? What? Do you think it's only if I take grains from them or fruits from them or vegetables from them as is? But I don't have to do it if they're mixed up in a mixture. Now, we've always learned that, things in mixtures become nullified. They're not as important. So what, do you not think that? To which he says, Amar le, lavadata, I didn't realize. So Amar Rabbi Zeira says things to himself. He said, what, you didn't think about it? What do you mean you didn't think about it? So Rabbi Zeira says to himself, Efshar gazru al tarovet demai umistayim milta de Rav Asi lemecha lisura? He says, could it be that when the rabbi said, anytime, right, the rabbis decreed this, anytime you buy from an Amaretz, you have to take Trumot Masrot. Could it be they weren't including this mixture in it, and it's only when you buy the actual produce, but not when it's mixed up in something else? Is that possible? And then, right, is it possible they did forbid this, and then Rabbi Zeira ate forbidden foods, not realizing? He says, tzadikim atzman lo koshken. So the first thing Rabbi Zeira says is, I can't believe the Rav Asi wouldn't have thought of this. If the rabbis really forbade it, there's no way God would have allowed this to happen. God would have done something, made it somehow that, just like he did with the animal, who wouldn't eat the produce, he would have made sure that Rav Asi didn't eat this if really the rabbis had decreed. But he doesn't yet have proof for this. So then he goes out, Nafik Rabbi Zeira dak bashkas. He goes out and he looks into it and he finds the source he's looking for. It should be Titania, not Titanan. Titanan is in a Mishnah. This is a Braita. He finds this Braita. Now, I told you we're going to go off on a lot of tangents today. So first tangent was, we're off on another story of Rabbi Zeira, right? Having nothing to do with our topic. Now what we're going to do is we're going to quote a Braita with two lines. We're going to deal, only one of those lines is relevant for our purposes, but then we're going to go off on a tangent on the other line, okay? And that's going to take us till almost the end of the daf. So just so you understand the order of events here, the connections. So it says here, Ditanya, halakhic yayin letet letoch hamurayis. If I buy wine to put in my fish brine, letoch alumti, which was a drink that was a mixture of wine with other things. So I buy wine from an Amaretz, and I want to put it in some combo of something, or karshini and vetch lasomem tchinim, to make some combo like crushed up vetch with other things. Adashim lasomem resisim. I buy lentils to put them with in a dish, a cooked dish. Again, these are all, I'm buying the raw item, but I want to mix it in something else. Of course, chayav mishum demai, because I brought the raw item. Ve'ein tzarich lomar mishum. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry. This isn't the source that we're going to go off on a tangent on. My mistake. It's going to be the next one. My mistake. It's going to be a tangent off a tangent. Okay. Anyway, my mistake that I jumped the gun. We're not there yet. Anyway, so this has two basic halachot. The first is, if you buy the raw item, you have to take Trumot Masrot. But if you buy it, or you go to get it from them, okay, sorry, I lost my place for a second. Ve'ein tzarich lomar mishum vadai, right? In other words, and of course, if you know for sure it wasn't taken. Ve'hein atzmam mutarim mipnei shehein ta'arovet. But if you buy the cooked dish or the morayis with the wine mixed in, then you don't have to take Trumot Masrot. So basically, what he had a hunch about, because of this potential tzadikim thing, he realizes is true. Okay? And then he says, yeah, they really weren't goes around ta'arovet. That's what it says here. This next source is where we're going to get off on a tangent. So now the Gemara asks, V'lo gazru al ta'arovet demai? Wait a minute. Did they not make a Gzeira on Tarovet Tamai? Look at this source. Okay, this is the source. It's going to have 2 lines, and we're going to get off on the other one after we get on the part that we want to deal with. So first they say, wait a minute. There's no Gzeira on Tarovet Tamai. Look at this situation. Tanya, there's a brayta that says, Hanoten l'shchento isa le'efot u'kdera levashel. Okay, lots of times not everyone had their own oven. So you have a dish you want to cook, and you give it to your friend, your neighbor. Now, your neighbor happens to be an Amoraim, so you give it to your neighbor to put in their oven, okay, or to cook on their stove. The first halacha, which is not our topic, but we are going to get it completely off on a tangent about, is that you're not worried that when I bring my kugel to my neighbor to put in her oven, that she's going to switch it with her own kugel, okay? I don't have to worry about that. Meaning, let's say it was Shemitah, and maybe it's produce that grew on the Shemitah year that we don't eat, like svichim, things that grow wild on the Shemitah year that we don't eat. Or I don't have to worry that she didn't tithe it, and like I have to tithe it when I get it back. No, we're not worried about that. Okay, but that's not our topic. The second thing, and they're talking about the seor, the right, like the sourdough, the thing that makes the dough rise, or the spices in it. Okay, just to get off on a bit of a tangent, just so you're not confused, spices you don't really have to take Trumah Masrot on them, so it could be the spices we're only talking about related to the Shvi'it issue, not the Meiser issue. There's some other explanations. There are some spices that are more like food, and they're like people call onion and garlic spices because they add flavor to food, and those obviously need Trumah Masrot. So that's another way to explain it, but that's a complete side point. The imamar, now this is the part that we want here. Imamarla, asili mishalaychi. But if I go to my neighbor and I say, can you make me a dish? What do you see here? If I say make me a dish, and they make it for me, when I get it back, I have to meiser it, even though the seor or the spice is only a minor part of it, right? And it's in a mixture, okay? So we just said that you don't have to worry about tarovet tamai, and here you do. So they say, no, this is a completely different situation. Because I asked my neighbor to make it for me, it's as if I took the raw ingredients and mixed them in. Again, when I take the raw ingredients, it's as if I took the raw ingredients from my neighbor and made something with it. So when I take the raw ingredients, I have to do maaser. But if they had just made 2 kugels and offered me one, that's a different story. Then I don't have to worry about it because it's a mixture. Okay? So that resolves that issue. Now we're going to get off on a big tangent, then very interesting. I find this interesting, and you're going to see some of the stories are kind of funny. Before we have one more answer. Ra from Amar Shani Seor v'Tavlin Dilatama Ave v'Tama Lo Batil. Right. Now the whole idea of a tarovet is one small part in a tarovet is just not important, right? Like bittul barov or bittul b'shishim, things like that, they're not so significant. But specifically the seor, that's what gets the whole dough to rise. That's a super important ingredient. It might be very small, but without that, you're not going to have bread. And the spice, without the spice, you're going to have completely bland food that nobody's going to want to eat. So those perhaps aren't batel, and therefore it's not viewed as a tarovet at all. That's a different answer. Okay. Now we're going to have 3 sources that are going to question the first part of that brayta, which again was totally relevant to our case. But, right, because what happened? We brought the story for the Bamtan Shel Tzadikim. That was all to say that tarovet tamai must be permitted because otherwise Rav Asi no way would he have eaten it even by accident. And then we brought the source to say, what do you mean? You do have to do maaser on it. Look at the story with the neighbor. And we said, no, that situation is unique for one of 2 possibilities. Okay. Now, wait a minute. Are we not worried about food being swapped by neighbors, by someone else who's an Amma Aretz? Now we're going to start with 3 sources. The first one is fun because it's a son-in-law with a mother-in-law. Okay, we're going to have, everyone knows how sometimes complicated relationship between in-laws can be. So here we go with our story. There's a Mishnah that says the following. Now let's say you have a son-in-law who has a mother-in-law who's an Amma Aretz. So again, she doesn't necessarily take Trumah Masrot, or Masrot particularly. So now he goes to the house and gives her some food to make for him or to make for their family. Anything he gives to her and then takes back. The first thing he has to do is before he brings her any kind of produce, he has to meiser it because you can't cause others to sin if she's not going to meiser it, so he has to bring it meisered already. But when he gets it back, he has to meiser it again. Because maybe, now why would he have to meiser something twice? Because maybe she swaps it with something with her own. Okay? So, if he brought her, let's say, raw ingredients to make a dish, and she returns the dish made, he has to worry that she used her own ingredients. So now they say, right, we're worried. Now, why would she swap it? Because maybe something he gave her got ruined, right? The cucumbers got disgusting already, the whatever, So you have to worry that she swapped it with something better. That was hers. So what do you see here? We're worried that people swap things with something better, maybe. So they say, no. Hatan kedetanya tama. There it gives a reason. What's the reason it says there? You ready for this? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, rotzahi b'takanat bita, ubosha michatana. Mothers always want what's best for their daughter. So the husband brought some not so great produce. She decides, I'm going to use my better, fancier vegetables, or the stuff rotted. I want to give my daughter good stuff. I want her to have nice food. So I'm going to swap it, but she's embarrassed to tell her son-in-law. She's not willing to be honest with him. So the son-in-law has to worry that the mother-in-law is not being honest, and therefore has to meiser the stuff. Right? This is why sometimes you try to do something good, it ends up causing more of a hassle than helpful, because now you have to take meiser from it. Okay, so that's a unique in-law situation. Can't learn from there to anything else. Turning now to Amud Bet. It's cute, right? Okay, wait, we're not worried in other regular situations. Here's another one. B'hatznan, the Mishnah says, Hanoten lepundakit. So now we're again back in an inn. You give the innkeeper, okay, lepundakit shelo. Maaser, anything you give to her. Again, same idea here about the pundakit not being an ama aretz. Maaser chunoten lavet chunoten limena. So here, you give a pundakit your stuff, and then you get it back, right? I was thinking, sometimes you go to a hotel, and if you want to bring some kosher stuff, like you bring it to them, and then you ask for it back. Now, nowadays, they would never swap your food with anyone else's, right? But the concern is, you gave her some stuff to watch for you, and then when you get it back, you never know, she might have swapped it. There's a concern that she might have switched it. So you have to meiser it before it goes in, because maybe she'll take it and eat it, and then you're causing someone else to sin, and when you get it back, because maybe she swapped it with her own stuff. So they say also this is a unique situation. Hatam nami moraya va'amra bar berav lechol chamima va'ana echol karira. Now there's an assumption here, because he's a chaver and he's someone who's careful, that he's like a ben yeshiva, they call him. Okay, Rashi I think uses language ben yeshiva, or someone I saw use that language. He's like a student or a rabbi or whatever he is, and the assumption is that it's, even though she's an ama aretz, she has respect for the chaverim, the people who are keeping these laws. So she thinks, oh, you know what? It's not appropriate that, like, this is the person who brought their stuff from far. It's not in good shape anymore. They're going to eat something cold and I'm going to eat something warm. No, I'm going to swap it and give them the fresh stuff. And therefore, we're concerned that in the end, she's going to swap it, but only for that particular reason, that she has a reason to swap it. Okay, like what the mother-in-law wanted the daughter to have better food. Here, the innkeeper wants this person to have better food. Okay, third source, last question here. And before we get back to Rabbi Zeira and his story about the Ben Tanshal Tzadikim, wait, we're not worried about swapping? Okay, this needs us to go back to the beginning of our Masechet about people we Chullin al atarat hakodesh. They treat it like kodesh. They don't want to get their food impure. So if a woman's impure and she's grinding grains with her friend, who's an ama aretz, okay, if she happens to be impure, the woman who's the eshet chaver, she's married to a chaver, as opposed to the woman who's married to the ama aretz, they can grind their grains together. But the first thing you have to realize is the grains are not their own. Their grains belong to who? Their husband, because women in those days didn't own things. So each woman has her husband's grains, and they're grinding them together. So we can do that together if the eshet chaver, the wife of the chaver, is tme'ah. Why? Because when she's tme'ah, she's going to make sure she's not going to touch them. She's going to make sure whatever she does, she doesn't touch them, because she doesn't want to ruin her grains. Which means she's not going to touch her stuff, she's not going to touch her friend's stuff, and therefore there's no concern she's going to eat the friend's stuff. Meaning, what's the problem with eating the grains? The problem is that it's not meiser, the am aretz is one. Okay? So far, we got that. So, she can grind together with her friend if she's tme'ah, because she's not going to nibble on the way, okay? Because once she's tme'ah, she's very careful not to touch anything. But if she's Torah, she can't grind with a friend who's nama aretz, because there's worry that she's going to start noshing when she's eating, and she might end up eating also from the grains of her friend. Okay, and that would be a problem because the friend is not ma'aretz and it's not meisered. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, af bizman she'itme'a lo titchon, mipnei shechaverta notenet la v'ochelet. This is the line that's important. It says, even when she's tme'ah, don't grind, because the friend might just give her some of her grains and say, here, eat this. And that, you have to worry about becoming tamei. She's not keeping it for any reason. It's not even her own stuff, right? She's trying to protect her husband's stuff from becoming impure. So the friend might just give her some and she'll eat it. Now, what's the problem? The problem is obvious. You might eat food that's not meisered. Well, what does this show? Well, there's an issue here. The friend, who's the Ama Aretz, is going to give the Esha Chaver grains that are not actually hers. They belong to her husband. And they're claiming here that this Ama Aretz woman might give away her husband's grains to the other friend to eat. Well, that's theft. Okay? Hashta Migzal Gazla. This woman is we're concerned that she's a thief because she's taking, okay, now it's a little weird, and that's what the Gemara is going to say ultimately, but she's giving her husband's grains to someone else to eat. That's theft. And that's the whole thing, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says she can't grind in that case because of the reality that we know that exists, that these Amei Haaretz are thieves, basically. Okay, it's not exactly the way you read that source, but in the end, they are thieves because there's a concern that they're going to give their husbands, right? Obviously, they do this. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, they say, if they're willing to steal, chilufei mebaya, of course, then they'll swap food of people. If they don't care about their husband's produce, right? Then if you give them something, they won't care and they'll swap it. So we should be concerned in all cases of Amei Haaretz swapping. So Amar Rav Yosef is, now that's unique. Katam nami morai of Amra Torah midai sheka'achlo. We're again comparing animals to humans. He says, oxen, right? There's a pasuk, lo tachsom shor b'disho. When an ox is working in the threshing floor, they're allowed, you can't muzzle them. They're allowed to eat while they're on the job. So basically this woman says, look, we're working, we're grinding them, my friend is helping me, of course I'm allowed to give her some. Now in the end, I think the Gemara is saying it is theft, but this woman is not considered a thief that we're going to say, oh, well, if she'll steal that, she'll swap people's stuff. That's different. This is, oh, well, if I don't have to muzzle an animal, or the more so I don't have to muzzle my friend, and I can offer her some of the grains while we're working together. Okay? So that seems to be resolved. We have three sources here where we tried to say, again, we got off on a complete tangent of the chilufei lo cheshin, and the Braita was brought for the second line to try to say, what do you mean? Ama Aretz we're not concerned about ta'arovet, and then we said, no, we're not. But the first line of that Braita was about the swapping that we're not worried about, and the Gemara had three sources where we do actually are concerned for swapping, but each case we explained is unique, okay? And we're not worried in regular situations. Okay, now we're going to just start, although we're not going to really see the connection at all yet, but start another story. Rabbi Zeira employs the same principle of, it must not, right? God would never bring a takala. This wouldn't ever let these righteous people sin by accident. So, Iyar Rabbi Yeshua ben Zeruz ben Chamif shel Rabbi Meir. Okay, Rabbi Yeshua ben Zeruz, who was the son of the father-in-law of Rabbi Meir, Lifnei Rabbi Meir al Rabbi Meir. Okay, he said this before Rabbi Meir about Rabbi Meir. Before Rebbe about Rabbi Meir, before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. He came to testify before Rabbi Yehuda Nasi about Rabbi Meir. Shachal aleh shel yerek bebeit shan. That he ate a leaf of a vegetable, but it really means like something more than that, in Beit Shan without taking Truma to Masrot. Why? Right? And not only that, he tir Rebbe a Beit Shan kula al yado. Rabbi Meir said that, on the basis of that, I just said this wrong. On the basis of that, Rebbe permitted all of Beit Shan and said Beit Shan doesn't need to take Truma to Masrot. It's not considered part of Eretz Yisrael proper. Doesn't need to take Truma to Masrot. So his brothers and his father's house ganged up against him and said, there's a place everybody said this is forbidden, and now you're going to permit it? So he quotes him this pasuk. This is Chizkiyahu Melech toward the end of Sefer Melachim, chapter 18. He comes right after all these other kings were there. He comes and he finally gets rid of this Nachash Nechoshet, which was a sign from a miracle that God had done. because the Jews were worshiping this nachash that they turned it into an idol. So he gets rid of it. So they say, Efshar ba asa v'lo b'yaro, ba Yehoshaphat v'lo b'yaro, lo kol avodas ba'olam, asa b'Yehoshaphat b'yarum. Asa and Yehoshaphat were among the good kings, right? We go back to Yehoshaphat again. We're among the good kings of the Judean kingdom. And they got rid of all the avodah zarah in their day. So how did they not get rid of the nachash nechoshet? Very interesting answer. He said they left something over for him to be able to have something great to do. Okay, like say, oh, I did this, I got rid of the nachash nechoshet. We'll say the same thing here. Yeah, it's true. No one else matured it, but they left me something to do so that I could matur it. So I could permit that was getting rid of our idols. This is actually permitting something. Okay, so we don't yet know the connection. We're going to get back to this tomorrow. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with Rabbi Zeira and exactly his line about the potential tzaddikim. We used that to show that in the end he conceded to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi that in the end the gezerah against the shechita of the Cutim was complete. Even if a Jew was watching, you can't accept their slaughter. Then we went back to what's the reason, and then we saw it because the Cutim, right, when the guy went to buy the wine, they realized from the Saba, that elderly guy told them that, these people, you really shouldn't buy their wine. Okay, and then they found out that some of them were idol worshippers. And then from then, we went on to the other story where they said they're really not shomrei mitzvot. And that was in a later time when it seems they really took the Gzeira seriously and then they got everyone really to accept it. Whereas in the early stage of the end, we talked about two possibilities about what changed. And then we got to another story about the potential tzaddikim with Rabbi Zeira and the eggs that were shrunken in the wine. And Rav Asi ate it, and they said, how could you have eaten it? He said, it must be, Tarovet Demai is not forbidden. He goes, he finds a braita to prove it, and then the Gemara starts asking on that braita, is that really true? And they bring a source, and from that source we get onto the issue of the switching the food. 3 difficulties on that from other sources. Resolved them, they were each unique. Didn't really teach you about the general rule. You really don't have to worry that they switch your food. And from there we got to this other story, which we just started, of Beit Shan, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow. With that, we finish. Wishing everyone a good day.